The forest was quiet. But it was a quiet that knew everything. Something shifted in the snow-covered undergrowth. A branch cracked beneath an unseen weight, and the sound stretched across the clearing as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. December 1944. Northern France. The Ardennes. The American advance had stalled. The front was a maze of frozen streams, ruined farmhouses, and forests that refused to reveal their edges. Supply lines were strained. Communications were intermittent. Men were diminished not only by enemy fire, but by cold, hunger, and indecision. The soldiers spoke little. Words cost warmth, breath, and sometimes courage. They moved in measured silence, every step an act of vigilance. Corporal James Harlan led the column. 24, once a surveyor from Ohio, he had learned quickly that war demanded patience and calculation more than bravery. He had mapped terrain and laid tracks, but here, in snow-laden ruins, calculation was survival. Behind him, Private Thomas Brooks followed. At 19, he had believed courage alone could carry a man through danger. The Ardennes had corrected that notion. Now, only disciplined caution remained. Each day was a negotiation with fear, each night, a reckoning with exhaustion. The village ahead had once been occupied. Evidence was everywhere, walls riddled with bullets, roof beams sagging under snow, windows staring blankly like eyes. Yet signs of life persisted, a thin wisp of smoke from a ruined chimney. Harlan signaled a halt. A small reconnaissance team peeled off, moving cautiously toward the village center. Tension moved like a living thing between the men. It had rhythm: inhale, step, glance, freeze, exhale. Every sound, snapping branches, distant artillery, the hollow knock of snow falling from a roof, became magnified in their minds, stretched thin over layers of fatigue. Captain Robert Whitaker, mid-30s, former high school teacher from Pennsylvania, observed from a low ridge. He had not fired a shot in weeks, yet he felt the weight of countless decisions pressing on him. Orders were simple: avoid engagement unless unavoidable. But in the cold, clarity was irrelevant, unseen threats outnumbered the living. Brooks' gaze fell on a broken wheelbarrow, wheels half buried in frost. Inside, a bundle of blankets, abandoned or hidden. He imagined civilians, or worse, wounded soldiers left behind. A decision formed unbidden: approach or avoid. Harlan noticed the hesitation. Decisions here were not tactical, they were ethical, psychological, immediate. One misstep could cost a man his life, or his sanity. A distant rumble broke the silence, not artillery, not gunfire. The sound of heavy boots across ice, deliberate, measured. Something, or someone, was approaching from the forest line. Whitaker crouched behind a collapsed wall. "Stay low," he whispered. "Don't move until we know who they are." The men froze, nerves taut. Their breaths mingled with the fog and fading light. The first figure emerged, one soldier, dragging what looked like a stretcher. Then another. Then more. Harlan counted silently: 5, 6, 7. They moved cautiously, deliberately. The village seemed to hold its breath. Whitaker risked a glance over the wall. The approaching soldiers wore unfamiliar uniforms. Not American, not German. Too thin for winter. The faint glint of rifles suggested a threat, but their posture was hesitant. Harlan crouched beside Whitaker. "Recon," he murmured. "They don't know we're here yet." The men exchanged looks. Fear existed, yes, but so did calculation. Confront or observe? Engage or evade? Every choice carried consequences beyond survival, touching conscience and the fragile humanity left in them. Time slowed. Footsteps on snow became deafening. Harsh breaths pierced the cold. The forest leaned in, magnifying each sound. Brooke's hands shook, not from cold, not from fear alone, but from anticipation. Waiting was worse than confrontation. Waiting required imagining every outcome, every moral compromise. Harlan placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Silent reassurance. Not courage, just presence. The approaching soldiers halted at the village edge, crouched low, shadows merging with ruins. One lifted his head. Their eyes met, not soldier to soldier, but human to human. Whitaker swallowed. This was what war reduced them to: judgment in an instant, decisions measured in milliseconds, consequences unfurling in slow motion. Then, from the northern corner of the village, a faint metallic clatter, a bucket hitting stone, echoed. The strangers flinched. The squad stiffened. The forest seemed to draw in its breath. Harlan adjusted his stance, rifle at the ready. Whitaker's hand hovered near his sidearm. Every instinct screamed caution, every thought questioned what to do next. Soldiers on both sides were caught in a frozen, suspended moment, not yet combatants, not yet allies, only human beings aware of each other, measuring, calculating, fearing. Then a sudden gust of wind whipped across the clearing, carrying snow in blinding sheets. The metallic sound repeated, louder, closer. Someone moved. Harlan signaled the men to hold. The strangers vanished briefly behind a crumbling wall. Then, one of them stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. Not threateningly. A child's face appeared, pale against a tattered scarf, eyes wide with terror. Before anyone could react, a sharp crack, wood splintering, rang from the village edge. The men tensed. Fear sharpened into clarity. The wind howled through broken roofs. The child flinched. In that frozen, suspended moment, they understood, choices were no longer theoretical. Each carried weight, immediacy, and moral consequence. The first rifle shot rang out. The first shot shattered the fragile silence like glass underfoot. Men ducked instinctively, pressed low behind walls and fences. The child shrieked, but the sound was swallowed immediately by the wind. The forest, dense and silent moments ago, now seemed alive with unseen watchers. Sergeant Robert Whitaker's eyes swept the ruined village. One thought dominated, every choice now carried consequences. Not just for survival, but for morality, humanity, for what remained of their souls in the winter-stricken Ardennes. "Hold your fire," Whitaker ordered quietly, voice hoarse from cold intention. "Identify before we engage." Private James Harlan peeked over a collapsed wall. Through drifting snow, he could see the figures in the courtyard. One of them crouched beside the child, hands extended slowly, a bundle of blankets in their arms. Not German. Not American. Uniforms dark and ragged, faces pale and drawn. Private Thomas Brooks swallowed, trembling. "Sarge, we..." Whitaker cut him off with a hand. Not an order. A warning: think, breathe, observe. The courtyard was a frozen tableau of fear, hesitation, and humanity. Every man understood that a wrong move could trigger a cascade of violence. But inaction was equally dangerous. The fog of uncertainty pressed on them like snow on branches, heavy and unrelenting. Harlan's mind raced. He remembered maps and measurements, the logic of survey work. Here, logic bent under the weight of morality. Should they hold position? Withdraw? Approach? The answer was unknowable, obscured like the footprints fading in drifting snow. Whitaker scanned the perimeter, noting frozen doorways, overturned barrels, shattered fences. Each object was a potential threat, each shadow a possibility. He could feel the pulse of his men, the tension vibrating under the surface, a living entity that demanded attention. The child stepped forward, uncertain, blanket clutched tightly. The figure behind them mirrored the movement, careful, deliberate. Whitaker exhaled slowly. "Keep low. Move only if I give the word," he murmured. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow stung faces, but the gust carried another sound, boots crunching on ice farther down the village road. Not approaching the courtyard, but the edge of the village. Recon? Reinforcements? Ambush? Whitaker did not know. The squad adjusted positions, pressing deeper into shadows. Harlan crawled closer to the wall, every nerve taut, calculating angles, distances, probabilities. Survival had become geometry and psychology fused. Brooks whispered, "Sarge, what if we can't?" Whitaker shook his head. "We adapt. That's all we can do." Harlan's eyes caught movement near the barn, a wooden beam creaking under weight, snow sliding off the roof. He froze. The child flinched. One of the dark uniformed soldiers raised a hand slowly, pointing toward the beam, then gesturing to the others. Whitaker understood immediately. These men were improvising survival in the same way as his own squad. The war had reduced everyone to the same raw elements: fear, resourcefulness, and instinct. "Hold steady," Whitaker repeated, softer now. "We observe. Wait." Time stretched. The courtyard, the ruined barns, the forests, all seemed to compress into a single frame of tension. Every decision, every glance, every involuntary shiver mattered. Brooks exhaled sharply. "Sarge, the kid." Whitaker turned. The child had dropped the blanket. It lay half buried in snow. The soldiers behind the child froze, unsure. Harlan's pulse raced. A moral and tactical dilemma in one frozen tableau: retrieve, retreat, or wait. Each choice carried risk. From the northern edge of the village, a soft metallic scrape echoed, tin cans or a bucket dragged across stone. Instinctively, both squads tensed. Whitaker counted silently, 3, 4, 5 soldiers advancing cautiously from the shadows. "They're moving around us," he whispered, voice almost drowned by the wind. "Stay low. Wait." Harlan squinted through the snow. One of the approaching figures tripped slightly, recovered, and gestured to the others. Coordination. Discipline. Despite ragged uniforms and frostbitten fingers, these men had skill. The American squad understood that skill could kill or save. Brooks' fingers clenched around his rifle. "They see us, right?" Whitaker shook his head. "Not yet. They're cautious. So are we." Every heartbeat was amplified. The fog pressed in. Silence interspersed with soft metallic sounds, the distant rumble of artillery, and the whistle of wind through broken roofs. Each noise was a signal, a warning, or a trap. Whitaker surveyed his squad: Harlan, Brooks, and the others, each pale from cold, eyes sharp with anticipation. Fear existed, yes, but discipline contained it, compressed it into observation and calculation. Then, from the barn corner, a small movement. Quick. A shadow darting behind a fallen beam. Harlan's stomach tightened. The child flinched again. The dark uniformed soldiers adjusted their formation, glancing toward their own flank. Whitaker made a silent decision. "Move. Carefully. Cover the left flank." The squad responded without sound. Each step calculated. Each shadow scanned. Every inch a negotiation between survival and morality. A distant crack, a rifle or falling timber, echoed. The child screamed, muffled by the wind. Harlan froze, torn between instinct to protect and order to hold position. Whitaker's mind raced. Any engagement now could trigger a chain reaction, a firefight, a panic, casualties. Yet waiting might allow the unknown soldiers to gain advantage, or worse, harm the child. Brooks' teeth chattered, not entirely from cold. "Sarge, what do we do?" Whitaker's jaw tightened. There was no answer, only the cold arithmetic of consequence: protect the innocent, survive the squad, maintain position. Any choice could fracture them morally or physically. The approaching soldiers paused. One step toward the child again, hands raised slowly. The child shrank back. Harlan swallowed. He felt the weight of every soul in the village, living, frozen, unseen. Whitaker exhaled, silent. The forest, the village, the wind, everything seemed to pause with them. A gust blew through the square, carrying snow and distant artillery. The metallic scrape repeated, closer this time, from the barn edge. The squad tensed again. Every instinct screamed danger, every thought calculated risk. Each man knew that the next few seconds could decide survival, morality, and the fragile remnants of humanity they carried with them. And then, a sudden, sharp metallic ring, louder than before, came from the barn. Whitaker's heart thumped in his chest, each beat a countdown. The unknown soldiers shifted. The child clutched at the tattered scarf. The wind howled, snow-blurred vision. And in that suspended, frozen moment, the moral calculus became immediate: act, or wait, or watch innocence teeter on the edge of war's brutality. A second rifle shot cracked through the fog. The second shot rang through the village like a bell of warning. The child flinched, collapsing slightly to the ground. The ragged soldiers behind the child froze, unsure, their hands trembling around rifles that had not fired in days. Every figure, American and unknown alike, seemed suspended, trapped in a world defined by fear and instinct. Sergeant Robert Whitaker pressed his back against the crumbling wall. His breath came in shallow clouds, visible in the freezing air. Decisions needed to be immediate, yet every second carried weight beyond calculation. "Cover the left," he whispered to Harlan, voice barely audible. "And Brooks, watch the barn." James Harlan's pulse hammered in his ears. His fingers tightened around the rifle. Every movement was measured, deliberate. Not just to survive, but to preserve the fragile humanity left in the frozen Ardennes. Thomas Brooks peered around the corner. His teeth chattered, partly from cold, partly from fear. "Sarge, what if they fire?" "What if?" Whitaker cut him off with a gesture. "No words. Observation. Calculation. Patience." The wind rattled broken roofs. Snow fell in thick sheets, blurring the line between friend and foe. The enemy soldiers, 7 in total, shifted slowly. They appeared ragged, frostbitten, yet coordinated. One step toward the child again, voice barely audible, and motion with hands open. Peaceful? Threatening? Whitaker could not tell. Harlan tensed. He imagined his own sister, 9 years old. The child in the snow could have been anyone's, and yet survival demanded detachment, calculation. A moral dilemma, impossible to ignore. A new sound arrived, boots crunching on ice from the northern edge of the village. Not approaching directly, but circling. Reinforcements? Ambush? Whitaker's instincts screamed danger. "Hold, don't fire unless I give the word," he murmured again, voice tight with tension. Every man in the American squad felt it, the weight of indecision. Act and risk death or moral compromise. Wait and risk the child, risk their own. Each heartbeat stretched, each breath a negotiation with fear. Harlan's mind raced. The forest line beyond the village shimmered in fog. Every shadow could conceal enemy movement. Every snowflake, every sound amplified. He imagined the possibilities: ambush, retreat, capture, injury, death. And yet, one truth persisted: inaction was itself a choice. Brooks shook, whispering, "Sarge, the kid's crying." Whitaker glanced toward the child. Pale, frozen, trembling. Snow clinging to tattered scarf. Each second etched deeper lines of fear on the child's face. The moral question now screamed, protect or stay safe? A flicker of movement near the barn drew Harlan's eye. One of the ragged soldiers had reached for something, a box, perhaps ammunition, perhaps supplies. Whitaker's mind raced. Any act could trigger a firefight. Every decision was now immediate and irreversible. Harlan exchanged a glance with Brooks. Both men understood. They had trained for battle, for tactics, for geometry and strategy. But none of it prepared them for this suspended human calculus: fear, protection, morality, and survival, all intertwined. Whitaker raised his hand slowly, signaling to advance. The Americans moved like shadows, careful not to reveal more than necessary. Snow swirled, muffling footsteps. Silence thickened, tension coiled in every frozen breath. The ragged soldiers noticed the movement. One stepped forward, rifle low, hands open in a gesture of peace, or surrender, or plea. Whitaker's squad froze, tense, every sense alert. Then the metallic clatter again, tin cans dragged across stone. From the northern edge. Too close. Too deliberate. A sound that promised danger. Whitaker whispered, "Brace yourselves. They're testing us." Harlan's thoughts went back to Ohio, to warmth, to maps and measurements. Now the cold, the ruined village, and the weight of responsibility replaced all theory. Decisions were raw, immediate, and morally fraught. Brooks' grip tightened. "Sarge, what if we can't?" Whitaker's jaw tightened. Words were useless now. Only action, observation, and discipline. Survival depended on all three. Then, without warning, one of the ragged soldiers lunged forward, not aggressively, but purposefully, reaching toward the child. The child screamed. Snow sprayed. Harlan reacted instinctively, raising rifle, fingers tightening. Whitaker's voice cut through the chaos. "Halt! Wait!" Time seemed to fracture. The forest, the village, the wind, all held still. Every man knew that a single movement could trigger bloodshed. Harlan froze. Brooks froze. The ragged soldier froze. And the child, trembling in snow, was caught in the middle of a moral equation too complex for any battlefield manual. From the barn corner, another sound, a heavy beam shifting under weight. Snow cascaded down, startling crows into flight. Whitaker counted silently, 2, 3, for more figures moving from shadows. The tension snapped. Decision pressed immediately. Protect the child. Avoid firing if possible. Maintain position. Avoid ambush. Preserve humanity. Whitaker raised a hand slowly. Advance. Carefully. Cover each other. The Americans moved. Shadows sliding behind walls, over snow-dusted beams, each step a negotiation between instinct and conscience. Then a rifle cracked, not at them, not yet. Somewhere in the courtyard. Harlan flinched. Brooks froze. Whitaker's mind raced. Every second now mattered. Every moral choice could tip into catastrophe. The child cried again. The ragged soldiers moved closer, uncertain, cautious. The Americans pressed forward, silent, calculated, shadows themselves in a frozen village, each step a battle of conscience as much as survival. And in that suspended, frozen moment, the next decision loomed larger than life: act to save, or hesitate and risk consequences no map, no manual, no drill could prepare them for. A second rifle shot rang out. The winter light was weak, gray, and unforgiving. Silence had returned, but it was not peace. It was the hollow quiet of aftermath. Broken windows stared like empty eyes, walls leaned with the weight of snow, and footprints in the snow traced every choice made, every hesitation, every action. Sergeant Robert Whitaker pressed his back against a fractured wall, surveying the courtyard. The child was huddled under a tattered blanket, still shaking, still alive. The ragged soldiers had retreated to the edges of the village, weary, uncertain, but also alive. Harlan and Brooks moved beside Whitaker, rifles lowered, breathing slowly. Exhaustion hung in their bones. Not just physical, but moral. Every decision had left a mark. Whitaker exhaled. "We survived," he said softly. Words tasted like ash in his mouth. Survival was one thing. Humanity, another. For Harlan, the map and calculations that had once defined his life seemed trivial now. Here, geometry gave way to ethics, probability yielded to conscience. The child, the ragged soldiers, even the shadows in the forest, all demanded consideration beyond duty. Brooks shivered, more from memory than cold. "Sarge, I don't think I'll ever forget that, the shots, the waiting." Whitaker nodded. "Nor will I. Nor any of us." The village itself seemed to breathe, bearing witness. Every broken roof, every collapsed wall, every frost-covered corpse of a flower in a garden told a story. Stories of fear, of survival, of moral compromise, of courage. Harlan crouched near the edge of the courtyard, observing the distant forest line. He wondered about the soldiers who had fled, the unknown lives intertwined with theirs for a few moments in snow and tension. Would they tell the story? Would they remember mercy as much as threat? Whitaker walked to the child. He knelt, voice quiet. "It's over, for now. You're safe." The child nodded, too exhausted to speak. Fear lingered in every gesture, but survival had a weight all its own. Harlan's eyes scanned the surrounding ruins. The metallic clatter from earlier, remnants of displaced cans and tools, was gone. Only wind, snow, and silence remained. Each sound was magnified, carrying the memory of waiting, of moral hesitation, of fear. Brooks knelt beside Harlan. "Sarge, do you think they'll come back?" Whitaker shook his head slowly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps not. We can't control everything. Only our actions, only our choices." In that moment, Harlan realized that the war was not only measured in victories or casualties. It was measured in choices made under pressure, in humanity preserved in the face of destruction, in moral courage as much as tactical skill. The ragged soldiers, now distant, had become more than enemies. They were human beings caught in the same storm, the same fear, the same exhaustion. The rifle shots had ended, but the memory lingered, a reminder that every life intersected here, briefly, in the cold, and every choice mattered. Whitaker's gaze lingered on the horizon. The forest beyond the village remained silent, hiding what he could not see. Snow drifted in the gray light. Every footprint in the snow was a story. Every step, an act of conscience. Brooks finally exhaled. I thought we'd lose them. Or ourselves." Whitaker placed a hand on his shoulder. We almost did. But we held. We remembered. That counts. Harlan looked at the child. In the wide, frozen eyes, he saw a reflection of all they had endured: fear, confusion, waiting, morality. He saw himself in Brooks and Whitaker. The fragile, quiet humanity that survived when violence did not define the moment. For a moment, the village was quiet. The wind whispered, carrying distant artillery echoes, distant enough to be ignored, close enough to remind them they were still in war. Whitaker motioned for the squad to move. Carefully, step by step, they left the courtyard. Each movement deliberate, each glance measured. Every snow-covered ruin bore witness to their choices, every shadow reminded them that war demanded moral as well as physical courage. They emerged from the village edge into the trees. Silence, broken only by footsteps in the wind through branches. The child clutched the blanket tightly. Harlan and Brooks flanked Whitaker, eyes scanning every shadow. Every decision ahead would be another moral calculus, another test of humanity in the midst of war. And as the sun weakly lit the snow-dusted forest, Harlan understood a truth that would remain long after the war ended: survival alone was not enough. Humanity, even in the smallest choices, was the measure of courage. Whitaker finally stopped. He turned to the squad and the child. We move forward. Together. In that quiet, fragile moment, the war's shadow remained, but so did their moral compass. Fear had been felt, morality challenged, humanity tested. And through it all, they had chosen, carefully, deliberately, to preserve life, to act with conscience, to endure. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to help us remember and share stories from the front lines. Stories from the past help us understand humanity in difficult times. Share your thoughts in the comments, every memory matters.